any conferences. We're now recording. I put up the placeholder for our WAS. That was, as you've joined in, that was MedHat chatting with Jim about our topic that's going to be this evening. Before I turn it over to our first speaker, I'd like to remind all that this is going to be very soon our Earth Day. A number of us have participated over the year, a little bit pixelated, but coming up 22 April, Earth Day already. Okay, so this evening we have scheduled Dr. Jim Tu and one of our WAS board members, our California representative. Jim's on the East Coast, so we're going to start initially with Dr. Jim Tu. Going to talk about several things, I'm sure, and Jim's unique style, but basically around queens. We're going to be talking about, he's going to be talking around queens and some unusual things. Jim is a Southerner from Alabama. He got his master's at Auburn, came to University of Delaware, or University of Maryland, got his PhD at Maryland.
If you're far from the light.
Okay, thank you, Dwayne. And then went on to a very unique program at Ohio State. Ohio State had one of the programs that actually was designed to teach beekeeping, and they would have residents of Ohio and a number of people that came from rather far away to take the program. And Jim would actually take the students, like many of our beekeepers, take them south for part of the winter season and jumpstart the season by going down and working with some of the larger beekeepers down south with the students, and then coming back and doing the programs in Ohio. The program is no longer continuing. It was in part a small program, and at some point, the administrators of Ohio State said, you know, we can't support a small program. But in the meantime, Jim had a very distinguished career working out of an experiment station, not at the Ohio State campus in Columbus, but in Wooster, Ohio. Jim is now retired, but like many of us retired people, more active than sometimes we were when we had our professional appointments. So Jim, if you want to bring up your PowerPoint, we'll get you started.
I was going to keep reminiscing for a few minutes. I didn't know we'd be walking that far down memory lane. Ironically, I think that program would have survived if we had hung on through COVID and this big boom we've just had in the last 10 years in beekeeping, with all these new beekeepers and new programs and new everything. But by then it was already moved on, and I had become extension. One of the things I did, Dr. Karen, there at Maryland all those years ago, as I did produce queens. We had 400 or 500 nukes, which on one hand is a lot, but on a commercial scale, that's nothing. But I learned firsthand that this queen thing and queen production can really be a pain. And then just because you wake up one day and you're old and you've done this for a long time, I still like to tell beekeepers that I have personally paid 75 cents for queens, $1.25 for a queen. When they went to $1.75, you thought you were just being robbed. And the irony is, if you did a terrible job and killed her introducing her, the producer would send you another one. And in the earliest of my years, in 75, when I was working with you at Maryland, states like Alabama and Georgia just had scores and scores of small queen producers, people with 400 or 500 nukes. So you'd buy these small queens that Dr. Nazar was talking about just a bit ago from these small producers. Those guys are all gone now. And I guess it's just a matter of expense, cost issue. And so the whole landscape in this queen thing has changed dramatically. And is it better? Is it worse? I don't know that I can say if it's better. It's different, but I'm not sure if it's better or worse. So the thing I'm going to stumble through here for a few minutes is the concept of working out a relationship with your queen. Because if you take beekeeping to the highest levels, and that's the game you want to be in, then you really want to do all the queen recommendations that are common. Requeen every year, probably. Used to be every 2 years, but more than likely now every year. But I've watched people through the years who would pay a lot of money for a queen and then really pump those colonies up and then be negligent in other areas. And so all they really did was pay money for a nice queen that probably left with the first swarm that they didn't control and then were not able to capture. Or even if they captured it, then you've still got this queen out of the nest, starting another program, another colony. So unless a beekeeper is prepared to do all the parts and pieces, really going to the extreme for the best queen you can find is probably like putting a nice pumped up engine in an otherwise defunct car. You need to have all the pieces. You need to have all the parts. She's a genetic reservoir. Herod Laidlaw said that, let me think how he described her, that she's more of a kit, K-I-T, than she is an individual in the colony. And as a kit, K-I-T, she's a genetic producer. She's a pheromone producer. She provides the demeanor of the colony. She essentially, as I have said through the years, she's the spark plug that drives the engine. In the earliest years, I've got an article that I've written. I think it's coming out. I have to write so far in advance, April, May. In May, the Ohio State was donated a box hive, a common box hive that through a fluke, the beekeeper 172 years ago also kept a diary. So he steadfastly recorded his ins and outs with that box hive. He built it himself. So it's unusual, number one, for those box hives to survive because they were destroyed when they were transferred to modern hives. And number two, it's really unusual to have the notes and comments on it. Not a lot, but just enough to know how old it was and who built it and whatever. I'm putting you through this because while I was researching and understanding these box hives and how they worked and going backwards in time, I went backwards in queen production. And I was really surprised to see advertisements 150 years ago. And if you update the currency, the queens were selling for about $100. So if you wanted an Italian queen 150 years ago, 120 years ago, you needed to get off your wallet. So I thought that the cost of queens and the headache of queens was a fairly recent thing. But apparently when Italians were really coveted and really hard to get, they brought high dollar, high values. Those were the early years. It's kind of out of the scope of my discussion tonight on queen problems and issues on mating procedures, but what a colorful event that is. Listeners, it's always an annoyance to me when you run into that person. No, you're at the grocery store and you're just shopping like everyone else. And somebody says, "Oh, you're that bee guy, aren't you?" And you respond that you are. And they say, "Well, the strangest thing happened to me last week. I was in my garden and all of a sudden this little ball of bees fell out of the sky and they seemed to fight and tussle for a few minutes. And then the bigger one flew away and the other one stayed there looking like he was paralyzed." Why would someone else get to see that? I would always pay big money to see that kind of thing naturally. But every time that I've been put through this story about this, it's always someone who just happened to be at the right place and this mating event of a lifetime was wasted on them. So there's no real reason to go into the mating procedures. It's a colorful event. It would take up the entire discussion. The selection process. Dr. Karen was there. I don't really know if anybody was conscious of the fact that the old queen program was dying. Starlines, Midnights, Miraz Queens, three-banded Italians, all of those early pre-Varroa strains of bees that we selected for, that we wanted wintering honey production capabilities, all of those had gone away. So those lines are no longer maintained that I know of. And now we're doing everything that we can with hygienic backgrounds to resist the mites and the viruses that mites vector. So I don't know if anyone's really noted the evolution of queen production, queen selection, moving from small producers and numerous little bee yards across various southern states or western states, all the way up to the huge operations now with thousands and thousands of nukes, and the strains are different. So they're selecting, in theory, for this biological machine that produces these eggs and pheromones. And it's important to quickly say that she's not going to live all that long. In my earliest years with Dr. Karen there at the University of Maryland, I would categorically say she lives 2 years and can probably go as long as 5. I don't know when the last time I've seen a queen go 5 years. So we need to all realize that even if you find the perfect queen, she's just going to be that perfect queen for about a year. If you're lucky, 2 years. My son-in-law absolutely had to have a drone helicopter because of drones, honeybees. It gets confusing, so I'm saying drone helicopter. So to help him justify buying this drone, and in a hurry, I just hung a queen underneath that and had him run that up over my bee yard, and it was immediate. We had a small cloud of drones flying around that cage. I'm sure the air was screwing everything up, and there's no science here. It's just us trying to justify paying $400 or $500 for a helicopter. So this looked like it made a good picture. And my wife and my daughter, the wife of my son-in-law, seemed to be able to justify buying this toy. But this does show the intriguing possibility of what could be done with these devices. I don't know where this drone thing is going. So that was interesting to watch that happen. These queens are always in high demand now. There's a high cost. I used to temper my comment as the cost have gone higher and higher and higher because the labor costs have gone higher and higher, and the issues is particularly in the southern states with small hive beetles, and virus issues, and Varroa mites, all the issues that go along. It's just not as easy as it once was to raise queens. So I no longer know. I'm too long retired. I've been off the game too long, sitting on the bench, kind of on the bench on the sideline. But I know that some of these commercial producers used to kind of roam the country asking, swapping stock so that they would have better selection varieties. But I think that now more and more, those selection procedures may come from super breeders, from some very sophisticated breeding operations in the country that produce breeders for breeders. There's drone issues. Apparently, there's a lot of confusion and discussion about maybe the queens are not the problem, maybe drones are the problem. So all of these systems, then the rejection of queens, the pathology and the mating behavior, these all make this system of queen production demanding and challenging. It's highly specialized. Reggie Wilbanks, years ago, when I was working with him and visiting him more often over in Claxton at Wilbanks Apiaries, said that he had to have 3 of everything, because when he's shaking packages and raising queens, you can't knock off a month to get a transmission put back in a truck. So this is a highly specialized job, very, very seasonal. and everything has to work at that time. There's no making it up or not, getting it the next month. The time's passing. This is Calvert Apiaries, and I put it up here kind of with a heavy heart. It was down around Mobile, Alabama. And that whole area, that gigantic swath of several 100,000 acres was bought up by some kind of mining operation, bringing in ore from Brazil into the port of Mobile. So Calvert Apiaries and that facility there is gone. It was just one more example of a large queen producing and package operation that went away because of the high value of the land that this was on. This whole point here is that these are commercial producers that produce great numbers of these queens. I don't know that I have any comment on the cost of the labor or the headache. It's a very demanding process to do. Whether or not that's part of the problem with our queen stock, I don't know. I would almost like to suggest that we monitor more than we manage. And I've got a thought here, and I don't know if I can sell it or not, but basically from now on, tomorrow, ironically, tomorrow, no joke, I've got to go out and I've got to start working my bees for the first time this year. The irony is the bees wait for no beekeeper. So while you're justifying, I had a sciatic nerve issue for almost 8 weeks. Half those weeks I could barely move. So I'm not going to do anything with bees. I can't even move. Well, that doesn't mean the bees knocked off and said, well, our beekeeper's sick, so we'll just be a little bit late getting this season going. That's not the case at all. Those bees kept right on moving. So today I've noticed that they were all clustered out front, about 4 or 5 pounds of bees hanging out front. And I know that those bees are going to swarm. Tomorrow, when I open them up, as I have done now for years, I will mentally look and I will roughly put them in these categories that I've got listed here: bad, poor, average, good, and great. And honestly, beekeepers, I'm just shooting for average. I'm at a place in life, I'm at a beekeeping spot in my beekeeping journey where I'm just trying to enjoy beekeeping. I'd like to have enough bees to do some photographic work. I'd like to be academically challenged by them, but I no longer have to have the biggest honey output that I can get or be the greatest beekeeper I can. So I would suggest that right away, for poor or average, you consider the season. Because if you've got a poor or average queen and late fall, early November, it's a little bit late to try to be getting good to great. So the reality is, probably about any given time, you're going to have your groups in threes. You're going to have those that are really not going to make it. You're going to have that group that could make it if you do something to help them. And you're going to have that group that's in great shape. So pretty much, if you look at a bee yard, you can put all the colonies in that yard, especially if they're just routinely managed, in those 3 groups. And so the poor group, probably write that off. That's going to be a dead loss. The one that could possibly be helped, the middle group, work with that one. See if that should be requeened, should it be fed. And then the one that's great, leave it alone. Beekeeper skills are required for all of this. So have an idea of what the caliber is of the queen you've got. But I would suggest that for most beekeepers, not commercial, not research, but just most beekeepers trying to keep bees alive, trying to get by, really go for an average or a good queen instead of trying to really knock the ball out of the park with great queens. Beekeeper skills are required. I mean, you're going to have to know what you're doing. So when you start manipulating, handling, picking up a queen, I don't know how somebody learns to ski jump. I've never understood how anyone learns to ski jump. I mean, you must just bust your rear end the first few times you come off that launch. So to some extent, in some strange way, you've got to pick up a queen the first time. you've got to handle her the first time. I mean, you've got to learn not to crush her, not to pinch her abdomen, grab her by her wings. You've just got to learn to do it. Don't do it with propolis on your hands. So there's no way to get these skills other than just jump in the deep end of the pool and learn as you go. So monitor your queens, which in a way is management, I suppose, because you may decide to replace some of those queens at some point, sometimes. Kim and I went through this a lot. It came up a lot. I've already mentioned the evolution that's going on, how we now get our queens from large producers in most cases, very large producers in most cases, and that the small operations seem to have gone away. They cost more. I'm concerned at times, beekeepers, that beekeeping has gotten to be really, honestly, expensive. And you see, everything happened when I was a kid, when I was a young guy, 40, 50 years ago. If you wanted bees, all you had to have was a table saw and some No. 3 pine lumber, and you could build a rough hive. Probably wanted to buy the frames and the foundation, but you could really cut corners and then let people know, call the extension office, call the local fire department, tell them you wanted bees. And during the spring of the year, there was always swarms somewhere. So I always thought that beekeeping was kind of cost effective then, but it seems now with all those nice catalogs, really high end equipment, things that even I really want, cost of queens, cost of bees, it's not for the faint hearted. So I'd like to tactfully ask if the time honored recommendations are still, in fact, time honored. So do you still tell a brand new beekeeper to rush out and spend $45, $50 more for the second queen? Or do you just suggest to that beekeeper that they combine that package with another if they happen to have two? Introducing queens, I've gotten reluctant about that. When I was paying $1.75 for a queen, even compared to my minimal income of $1.15 an hour at the time, the queen was still affordable, but they're kind of pricey now. So I don't know that you can just categorically say what I did in 1976 to introduce a queen is exactly what should be done right now in 2024 with the value of the queen and the value of the bees so significantly increased. Kim would always say, just leave them in the cage longer. And I don't know what else you can do, but that always made my skin crawl. Because if I had bought a queen in late spring, she was probably banked from earlier in the spring season. I don't know how long she'd been in the cage already. So I was skittish about putting a queen. It's in a full flowered functional feature. And I'm just going to pick her up by all four of her wings and then push her into a cage and tell her she's going to be fine for 2, 3, 5, 8, 10 weeks in that cage. So I don't know if just leaving them in the cage longer is always the best answer for a more secure introduction. I'm afraid that it's going to be more of an introduction into a nuke, more carefully, smaller introduction rather than just going straight to the colony that you want to introduce. Cage design, if you see, I'm coming back to this picture. I guess I can't do it. Cage design, there's so many cages out there. I've got a picture coming up. I thought it was next. I'm sorry. There's so many cage designs out there right now that if you see a lot of options like this, that means to me that the best design has not yet been decided upon. It's still going to be a while before you get to it. This queen, this was about 7 years ago. So she was probably a $25 to $35 queen then. I don't know what was wrong with her. She seemed to have a good demeanor. She had a good personality. She was beautifully colored. It looked to me like, from my perspective as a beekeeper, this queen had it all. She lasted one night after being released according to all the rules and regulations, and no actual fighting. The next morning, she was done. So when you come out and see that, Beekeepers at that moment, what's your policy going to be? Are you going to rush out and get on the phone and say, I need another queen right now? Well, I need to remind you that the bees are what? They're not waiting on the beekeeper. So if they've already thrown this queen out front, they already have a game plan back inside their own hive. They've already initiated queen replacement or something. So if you run up the road, order a queen or buy a queen and get one 3 days later, then you've got to kind of put toothpaste back in a tube, because you got to go backwards. You've got to back that colony up to the point where they are in the mood to accept yet another queen. So you have to make difficult decisions. How much season do you have left? How much money, how much more money do you want to put in this colony that's had this problem? Do you want to wait, let them produce their own queen? Do you want to combine it? You've got other options. That's why you're the beekeeper. You have other options other than just buying another queen. I used to be better at marking queens. I marked that queen. I was surprised at how stumbly I was. And then I could tell about 4 months later, there's my queen out in front of the colony with that mark there. She made it about 4 months. I have no idea what her problem was or why she would go so long. And then maybe she had a heart attack. I don't know what happened to the queen, but I did clearly recognize that my queen was now out front and that the colony was doing whatever it was doing inside to replace that queen. So when you see that, beekeepers, and you see how far along that queen is already decayed, you just know that the game plan has moved along inside that colony. So probably adding a commercially produced queen to that colony, that window is closed. That ship has sailed. I was so incensed. This queen was outside of one of my colonies at Ohio State. And you know, I was coming up on retirement, and you see a queen like this who in her own way has retired. Why would the bees do that to her? Chew her wings off. As I recall, one of her tarsal claws had been pulled off. One of her antennae was gone. This is just not my idea of a retirement plan. I don't know why the bees were so hostile to this queen that had been in this colony for a season or two. But sometimes the bees do their own thing. I did not think to photograph it, but a totally separate queen a few years later was just 3 body segments: head, thorax, and abdomen. All her legs, all her expendable parts had been pulled off, and she was just lying there writhing on the ground, 3 body segments. Sometimes this procedure can really be brutal. Excuse me just a minute, I got a cough. I thought I could get through this. I've got a cold. What are you going to do with this? You could do instrumental insemination, but that queen's not going to be accepted. So whatever the beekeeper was doing did not work out well in this case at all. So this is just a wasted effort. This queen's not going anywhere. This is a cell that's been polished down. You can see, what color am I going to have here? Red. You can see that tip. It's got that cut in it where the bees have thinned that back. The bees were the ones that decide when that queen can emerge. They can keep her in there, or they can let her out, or they can open it. But the house bees have a lot to say about when those queens emerge. And so when you see the cells this far along, even if you tear them down, that colony is not going to be in the mood for accepting a caged queen. Then I enter this thing called a dark period that just drives me crazy. And that is the period that you're required to wait. Is the queen in there? Is she mated? Has she started to produce eggs? Is this colony going to make it? Should I combine it? All of these thoughts are going to be common, and all of these thoughts require patience to get through this thing that I've labeled the dark period until you finally begin to see eggs on the other side. And don't go crazy. Don't go out there every day and open that colony twice a day looking to see if you can find one egg, because every time you open that colony, then you're running a risk of disrupting this natural queen replacement procedure. Or if you did, in fact, introduce a queen, getting that queen established with a new brood nest. As best I could, not being a Photoshop aficionado at all, but just doing the bottom 15 to 25%, I tried to make this virgin queen, based on the size of her thorax, approximated this mated queen over here. I need to see. I'll try to do that. I need to move this around so I can see my own slides. So the virgin has about a 0.26 inch abdomen. This one has about 0.3 of an inch. Can you see here that distance compared to this distance and a properly mated queen? This is the business end now. This queen's ready to go. She has a seminal load. She's this is a USDA picture, so that's probably a pretty good queen. So you can tell the difference, and you can also see, once again, in this USDA photo, really nicely done. Look at that beautiful retinue around that queen, and look at the retinue around the virgin queen over here. So you can clearly see that this queen on the left, the unmated queen, does not have the influence and the authority that the queen on the right has. These are the queen cage shot that I thought was coming up early on. There are just innumerable queen cages. This is not everybody, you know, everybody who's kept bees more than just a few years knows how many queen cages there are around. The Benton 3-hole cage over here on this side is one of the most common, still in existence, but there's all kinds of cages around that, especially this unit down here, that are now quite modern. I did this. There's not but one of these, and I lost it. It was just a piece of scrap PVC piping. Down at my small finger, there's window screening glued over that end. That saw kerf by my ring finger was where I gave them room to feed and get to the queen inside. It was my effort to make a one-handed queen cage, because it's been my observation catching queens and using a cage that you need a third hand. So I thought there must be some way to make a one-handed cage so that I could use my right hand to drop that queen in that tube and then put that tube inside the colony. Well, I never know what happened to it, but it's long gone. Plus, the size was terrible because it didn't fit anywhere in the colony. You had to put some kind of riser on it, but that's just my addition to the queen cage fiasco, where you can have one more design added to the number of cages available. This is truly a bad queen. In fact, I don't know if she's still even in the colony or not, based on the queen cells that are there. This colony is not going to survive at all. This is not going to be anything that's going to go anywhere. So you can either pull the plug on this, combine it to do something, but this is not worth a queen. This one is just done. Sometimes, you know, it's just like the old American foul brood days. You think an American foul brood colony is going to be an old, rotted, decrepit colony. I've had to burn some equipment. This was the first cycle of bees to go through. So not always in those old days did you burn decrepit equipment. You had to burn some really nice, upgraded, just painted last season, and we got to torch it all. Every time you kill off a queen, you think she's going to have frayed wings and a broken antennae and, you know, whatever. So when people like me make the recommendation that you requeen every year, I want to tell you that there's an emotional resistance to that. There's a pushback to that. When you open the colony up and see, well, she's not perfect, maybe a little bit spotty, she's been better maybe, but she's doing okay. At that moment, you have to decide what your queen maintenance standards are. Are you going to pick up that queen who's doing an okay job? Could be better, could be worse. And what? You're going to crush her are you going to crush her thorax? She's done, drop her in the grass, and then introduce a new queen? Because if you follow the high end recommendations, and if that high end is your goal, then that's what you do. In the earlier years, when I was doing this, I would say, well, I'll put her in a cage and I will put her in an observation hive, maybe, or I'll do something. And normally what happens is she sat in the cage on my desk and then she died a week or two later in the cage. She'd have been much better off if I had just killed her right on the spot and then reintroduced the other queen. It's a lot like putting a spark plug up on a plate in your shed beside the lawnmower, thinking that somehow that spark plug is going to get better again. It's not. So if you're going to do this based on the high standard productivity of beekeeping, this queen doing an okay job, it's just going to be automatically replaced because she's going to be a swarm queen the next year. This is your window to get that done. So you could also, sometimes I put that in just to do something. I said that you could possibly use her to make splits or something, but really there's just no demand for last year's queen. It's just not much there. This queen drove me crazy, and I'm using her as an example. And that's one of my questionable marks. Yes, it is. That's one of my questionable marks. But she was a beautiful queen. I mean, everything about her looked good. She looked like that. Her brood production, here she is over here. Her brood production, can you even see it in there? This, and maybe another frame or two like it, was the bulk of the colony. Her brood should have looked more like this. It looked like this. I want to tell you, beekeepers, I had every intention. I just couldn't believe it. She looked so good. She looked mated. She carried herself like a nubile queen. I didn't know what to do with her. So while I was trying to decide, the days turned to a week, the week turned to 10 days, the queen stayed out there. I'm going to have to do something with that queen. It's going to be laying workers. She's probably gone by now. That queen suddenly turned on and her brood did begin to look like that. I'm not sure if that's one of her frames, but it looked good. Now I'd like to ask myself and anyone else a question here. The only pollen that I see on that frame is one cell right there. Was I judging this queen as being a low producer when in reality there was a pollen or a protein deficit going on at the time that I wasn't aware of? And I only bring that up just to add to the confusion of what do you do? Do you replace that queen? Is it a poor pollen flow? Am I just a terrible beekeeper? So it's difficult to know exactly what decision to take at 45, 50, 60 bucks a queen and how to handle this situation. She went on to be a decent queen and she got her season in. She just got a terribly late start. So whatever the reason was, it corrected itself. And then things really go wrong. My neighbor came over one day. He had been already outside cutting his grass. And he said, it looks to me like, Jim, this is going to really be a bad year for yellow jackets. I've been stung 3 or 4 times already. Well, beekeepers, I knew that it wasn't yellow jackets. I knew that it was my bees doing it because yellow jackets were still in the queen stage. They were still founding nests. There's no yellow jackets workers flying around stinging my neighbor on his John Deere tractor. I had a colony that was a swarm the previous year. It came in on itself. It was one of those beautiful days. The swarm came in, pinpointed, moved into an empty colony in my yard. It was just free bees. I just absolutely loved it. And within just about one brood cycle, I began to notice, and when you walk back in the morning to enjoy the bee yard with a cup of coffee and a crooked arm and a donut, that there'd be bees. There'd be a bee or two already around you just walk in the yard and I'd already have defensive bees around me. And it only got worse. So I knew that I had a feisty colony. Now here's the deal. There was 12 to 15 colonies in my yard at the time. How do you pick out the one that's gone feisty? I named these colonies sentinel colonies. Nothing about this is a traditional bee term, because I'll just say it was this colony here. This colony became the guard hive for the entire yard. So this colony here and these colonies back here were being protected unintentionally by this colony, because this colony was attacking anything that came in the yard, including my neighbor cutting his grass next door. So my enjoyment was reduced. My angst was increased, because I had a queen inside a colony somewhere that was giving me grief and was unconscionably attacking my neighbor, not once, but 3 or 4 times. I had to do something. I thought, well, what, you just kill a colony? We have had to do that before with American foul brood, and it's not a pleasant job. And I'm thinking, well, what if you choose the wrong colony and soap them down and it's not the right one? So I worried and fretted over it, and finally kept going through the colonies, picking out the one that I think was it. I gave it my best shot. My long-suffering friend here helped me pack that thing up, and I moved it 40 miles away like a penal colony by itself. I did split it into halves when we got there to get that thing away. And beekeepers, that was the hive, and life did return to normal. And I tell you this story because somewhere in one of these halves is a queen that was producing stock so feisty that I had to do whatever it took to get it out of the yard. That colony needed to be requeened. And I'm admitting to you that it was not easy to do, because it was hard to tell which colony was causing the anxiety. It had a reasonably happy ending in that within about 9 months later that winter, a bear attacked these things and destroyed both of them. So that's how the colony ended. There's this oddity. Here's the queen. So what does this make this? I don't see that very often, especially that close together. But I guess at times, stranger things have happened. I elected under these conditions to do nothing. Let the bees sort it out. I suppose I could have introduced one of the queens somewhere else, but I did nothing. I don't know that I needed a queen at the time. I don't see that often, especially having a camera with me, and especially with the picture turning out well enough. Flighty queens, one of the reasons I'm writing an article next month, not next month, in June for ABJ. I've named it the disposable queen, because whether or not we want to admit it, queens are disposable. In the earliest days of packages and queens, I would do the fast release and just dump them out and close it up and be gone. But as the cost of packages went higher and higher, and the weather was sometimes questionable, I did this slow release more and more. And I don't like to just leave that queen laying there with that cork exposed. So I would release the queens directly. And I estimate that about one queen out of probably 80 to 100 will come out of that cage like a bullet and go straight to the air. And so you just have to know that some of these queens are remarkably flighty, and then not wanting to get off the subject about packages and queens in the wrong place and whatever, just leave everything alone, move away, and really hope that she finds that open colony and settles back down there. But sometimes queens can be particularly flighty. They can run on the comb, they can festoon on the comb, and that may be reasons ultimately that you don't like them, but I don't know that I'm saying that you're going to replace them. I've mentioned several times marking queens. I think this is Sue Kobe. I think I got this picture from Sue. So I like to mark queens. It's just good to know. It does help me find them, and I do use the system, the color the queen color code system. This is my effort at a green paint dot. And it's really interesting to learn to do that. So, of course, you go to the long suffering drones and practice on them, but marking queens is a good thing. I got this photograph from Dr. Dewey Karen sometime. Dr. Karen, it must have been 1976 or 77. I don't know this. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know this guy, but he always had this hang dog look. And I always enjoyed telling people he had just been told to find the queen in those two colonies. I don't know what they were showing. There had to be some kind of comparison of honey production or something. But finding queens is one of those things that we could really use some help with. And I just can't help but believe, with technology abounding the way that it is, that there's not going to be something in the near future, some dot that I put on the back, just like an Apple dot that I got on my hat right now. So I can go to my phone and find out where I've left my hat. Of course, the Apple dot's entirely too large, but there's just got to be some way, some procedure for helping you find the queen. I don't know why you'd want to find the queen in any of these colonies. These colonies are beautiful, but if you did want to find the queen, it's going to be a first-class miserable situation to do it. And then stranger things have happened. What if the underpinning to your beehives collapse? I mean, how are you going to put those queens back in the proper one? You don't put them back. All you do is just clean the mess up, put colonies back together, use gigantic amounts of smoke, let them all settle down, and then go back about a week and a half, 10 days later, see who lucked out and got a queen, and see who didn't get a queen. Up to this point, what I want to tell you is that this queen thing is a moving target. We put a lot of emphasis on the value of a queen. We really give her all the credit. We give her all the blame. But in reality, the whole colony ecosystem is what's important. And the queen is a vital part of that, but so are the workers, so are the drones, so are the nurse bees. I mean, every part of the bee ecosystem is critical. We focus on the queen because she's so novel. You can see her, she's there, she's got an influential position, but she's got a job I really wouldn't want. She's got to please at least two different bosses, the beekeeper and the bees in her own colony. And should she not be able to please both of those entities, then she's going to have a particularly short career. So this queen thing is not neat and clean. Yes, you should requeen about every year, at least every other year. Yes, that's going to involve you finding the queen, killing the queen that's in there, and then correctly reintroducing a new queen. None of those things are easy to do. So ultimately, each beekeeper is going to have to decide what level of queen monitoring that they want to go to implement their own plans. That's the best I can do from across the country. Pitch dark here. I bet you've still got sunlight where you are. Thank you for listening to me very much.
Thank you, Jim. Interesting. A number of different topics that you were able to try to cover in the short time and bring up. I have one comment on the two queens. We were doing a series of experiments of brood breaks. And when we did the brood breaks in the spring, which is a normal time to do it, we found a very small percentage, less than 2% would have two queens. But when we tried to do it in the fall, as many as 20% of the colonies would have two queens. So I think it's like a lot of things is seasonal. It's timing is everything. Why would colonies want to hold on to two queens later in the fall than necessarily in the spring? But we did that 2 different years, and the results were the same both years. And of course, with two queens, you never look for the second one.
Right.
Never.
You're exactly right. Didn't Rob Page say that if they were super sisters or something like that, that they were much more likely of being tolerated because they were so
Yeah.
genetically similar?
Somewhat similar, apparently. Yeah. 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 Oh, very interesting. We had one question come in. What would cause a colony to become queenless in early spring after the overwintering period?
It's going to be multiple possibilities, and they're all point blank guesses. I mean, a viral infection because of some Varroa population there, or a disease, bad luck. I don't know. I guess I'd like to almost ask the listener: was the colony just inspected? Because in this article I'm doing for the Bee magazine, I confessed some idiotic things I've done in the past where I kill my own queens accidentally. So sometimes putting a colony back together, putting frames back in, I crushed a queen between two pieces of burr comb as they reunited themselves. So I don't know that mystery can be solved without some kind of forensic undertaking to what happened to that queen. Did she seem like that picture I showed, cosmetically perfect, laying on the ground dead? Or did she seem to have a dented thorax, or was there some indication of trauma? But I'm not surprised, and I would like to reassure the questioner that ambiguity and uncertainty is not uncommon. Most of these things just don't get answers.
Yeah, as you said, a moving target, if nothing else. Dom had a question. Are swarming bees more defensive when swarming than when eventually hanging, as the bivouac in a tree?
Can I just give you my personal experience? I got no science, but my personal experience is that the bees that are actually swarming are completely distracted from anything I'm doing. If you get one down your collar or in your ear or behind your glasses, you're probably going to get stung. But as far as them coming for you, no. But now, after they've hung there on a bivouac site for a day or two, went through a chilly night, they can be testy when you show up a day or two later. But while they're actually issuing from the hive, they've got a different mindset. They don't care about me. It's a biological moment to be at that particular event when that swarm is issuing. I'm always kind of exhilarated, even though my bees are flying away and I'm losing my queen. I mean, it's a biological moment to see that happen and how those bees are so good at it.
It sure is. Yeah. Jim, we had a comment on that they love your podcast, something that you've really gotten into recently in partnership with the late Kim Flottam.
Right.
You want to say something about your podcast while you have a chance?
Well, I guess I could. It's Kim came to me. I don't worry. I'm not going to go into a long story. Kim came to me and said, we want to do just a very casual, easy discussion. We don't want to do sophisticated science. People are driving to work. They just want to listen to beekeeping for a few minutes. So we do these, I hate to say off the wall topics, but anything can be a topic. The main thing is we're not trying to give a lecture. So you don't need a pencil and paper or some kind of recording device because it's not that kind of topic. I really enjoyed doing it. In my retirement years, after I said I wasn't going to use that word, here I am using it. In my retirement years, it's kept me focused and gives me something to do. And it's not my technology. So I've enjoyed learning, stumbling. It comes out every Thursday morning. This coming Thursday, it's going to be a Jim 2 desperation topic on exactly what do you do with last year's honey on the dead out that you had left over, or what do you do with honey that you wouldn't want to eat that you took out of a cutout maybe. So you end up over time accumulating this honey that isn't really pristine. What are you going to do with it? So I tried to talk about that for 20 minutes. It's kind of the dirty underbelly of some of the aspects of beekeeping. That wasn't a very positive attribute about my podcast, was it?
Where do you get your inspiration or your topics ideas? They just pop into
Well,
your
what
head,
you're
or-
calling inspiration, I would call desperation. There's a totally different motivational factor. Desperation is different than inspiration. I don't know. I mean, ironically, this was the editing procedure that we used to redo the ABC and XYZ. So every topic in that book is on that list. And so if you want to pick out some kind of list right away, pick it up. And here's swarming and supering and temperature control and water for bees and wet combs and wind. And that's just the W's. So you can usually find the topic just for 20 minutes or so. And it's actually only about 15 minutes of actual dialogue because the rest of it is introducing and getting in. And we have some sponsors. We acknowledge them. I don't make it. I mean, I don't do this for money. Let me just be point blank. I just do it because I enjoy doing it.
You haven't identified it, and for those that may not know about it, how do they find your podcast?
Well, it's on all the systems. I can't take any of the credit for the engineering of it. Jeff Ott does all of that. And so if in my case, if you'll look up Bee Obscura, it'll be right there. And it's on all the podcast platforms. And a more sophisticated and in a more educational system is the longer podcast that goes closer to an hour, where these fellows have interviewed people from all over the world. I mean, these are respected scientists and people who are critical to beekeeping. So there's a sister podcast that's much more formal and much more academic.
And that's Beekeeping Today podcast.
That's Beekeeping Today podcast. And that'll all turn up when you find Bee Obscura and Beekeeping Today. It'll all be there.
And this is a weekly you're doing them each week.
Each week. Weeks really go by fast, Dr. Karen. You'd be surprised. You finally get 3 of these segments in the can, and you think, oh, I can take a break. And before you know it, those 3 weeks are gone, and then you're done again. In fact, I'm looking at all 4 of everybody on this screen right now. You could be on a podcast segment, so stand by. You may be getting a call to talk about your aspects in beekeeping.
Okay, sounds good.
It'd be a lot of fun.
Another question has come in from a person that asked the earlier one, and this one isn't any easier to try to answer. What have you done to minimize queens killing queens when trying to raise queens with a queen castle? I don't know if you've used them very much, queen castles.
I haven't used the queen castles very much. No, I have not. Can someone help me with this?
I don't know. It comes in from anonymous. Kurt, would you have some experience with this?
I do not. You can ask the attendee to raise their hands, and I can unmute their mic if you would prefer.
Med Hat, do you know anything about queen castles?
Here, I hope that's not the Queen of England.
No, turn your mic back off. Thank you. To the questioner, I'm sorry, I can't help here.
Yeah, Queen Castle, no.
Okay, I've had relatively little experience with them, but the issue is, you've got you've taken a 10 box and split to have 3 nukes in it, even 4 nukes in it, and each one of them has a queen, and inevitably one of the 3 or 4 comes up queenless. So why? Where did she go? What reason is one of the 4, which you raised the same way, same area, everything? Why is 1 or 2 not still with that queen that you knew was in there? You saw her, you put the queen cell in there, but they end up queenless.
I have no proof. I always suspected the errant worker drifting from one cubicle to another that was offended by what they perceived to be a foreign queen. I have no data. I have no experience. I have no stories. I just often thought that it wasn't the queen just vanishing, but she was actually murdered by a bee that drifted to the wrong container, the wrong segment.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Frank Lindsay added a comment. I think it has to do with pheromone spillover, since they're, they're all right close in the same box in effect. So, we keep having to come back with queens and talking about pheromones. And so, I mean, that's perhaps a logical place to start to look for reasons. Yeah.
So I have a question for the doctor.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, you're interested in one-handed queen cages. But I
Yes.
noticed there wasn't a queen pipe in your picture. Have you used those?
Describe it to me, sir.
Think of a nice smoking pipe that is clear,
Yeah.
and you set it over the queen, and she walks up
Yes.
the stem. I've been
I-
using them for 6 years now, and I won't use a clip anymore.
I have seen those. Once again, I've not used them. I need to go buy equipment, I guess. When you've been keeping bees forever, all my equipment's 50 years old, seems like. I've seen those pipes,
Send me
I've
an
not
email
used one.
address and I'll ship you a couple. I buy them by the 100.
Oh, okay. qb2@gmail.com. But I'd be interested in doing that. I haven't used the clips either. I just keep my hands clean. I've gotten to where I always carry that alcohol rub that does a good job of cutting propolis. And then just be sure
the pipe makes it really easy to put her back in because you open up the pointed tip and
Yeah.
you can put that down between frames and she walks right in.
Okay.
The other thing is my habit with 3-hole queen cages is before I open them, I always spritz the queen with a little light sugar water. Then she can't fly.
Well, that's good. Plus, that should be groomed. That the bees will groom that off of her straight away.
So, and sometimes I'll put a little bit of lemongrass oil in that spray, but I'm not sure that helps acceptance or not.
That sounds like it would.
Jim, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Beekeepers always innovative. And now some of them, they like to use marshmallow as a plug in the queen cage to slow release a queen. And they later, they swear by it. And I tried it a few times in large number of queens, but I found because the split did not have enough time to lose the old queen smell, lots of queens were killed. But still, people like to use that still easy plug of that marshmallow to use it in the 3-hole cage. And instead of releasing the queen from the side where is the candy, they open the other side and put the queen, that plug of the marshmallow. And I have no idea why.
I haven't done this in many years, Medha, but it was my experience that they ate the marshmallow. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. That they ate the marshmallow too fast, and that the release procedure was probably, can I say, double? It was too fast.
Right.
And if you couldn't crush the marshmallow enough, I don't want to argue with anyone. If someone's got a procedure and it works, have at it. Yeah. But I could not say that in my experience, the marshmallow thing worked out as well as I wanted it to with the queen that I was really serious about. If I had an older queen and I'm just tinkering around, that's one thing. But if it's a research project or a queen I'm serious about, it was too fast.
The second one, when people, they try to put queen cell in the top honey super, and they believe that queen will emerge and start fighting with the older queen, and she will take over. And they say, I don't have to look for the older queen.
I've not heard that in 25 years. There was a commercial beekeeper 25 or 30 years ago who the last thing he did when he closed up his colony was put a queen cell or two in the super. And he said he never had to requeen,
Right.
because this was how the bees would deal with it. That queen was, those ripe cells were way up top in essentially an empty super. And then the virgins would emerge. I don't know, Dr. Nazar, if it worked out or not, but I have not heard that in a long time. But well, why are you doing this to me? I wouldn't do that either, because it's all that work to raise those queen cells just to be putting two of them there, like that's going to have a happy ending. I just,
There's
that
few
wouldn't be,
things
that wouldn't be hard to look at, but I got to know more about the efficacy of that before I go through so many queen cells and so much effort.
basically, yes, my answer is similar to yours. If it works for you and you see it is working for you, I cannot recommend it, but good luck with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even if you had more queens, and even if you go back and the queen is gone, that doesn't mean that that's that virgin you put in there. It just means that they still replace the queen. So even that doesn't tell you for sure that your system worked.
Yeah.
But he was he was one of those guys who did this for a living. He was comfortable with it. He had confidence in it. I mean, who am I to say that that's not something that would work? I would never say that. But
yeah,
I would personally want to know more before I did that.
Yeah. Thank you.
No, thank you. That was a nice old memory.
One final question, Jim, and we're going to move on. Scott had asked, do you have any experience with inseminated queen versus the natural bred queens on their vitality or lifespan of either?
My own experience years ago, Dr. Rothenbuehler at Ohio State taught me to do AI work, and I was keen on that for a while. It was exhilarating. You were lord and master of your own beehive and the queen progeny there. But I was never proficient enough to say that my AI queens or II queens, whichever way you want to go with that, would ever have outperformed a naturally mated queen. I suspect that my technical ability was low enough. So I'd like the technology, and it's the only way that we have for conclusively controlling breeding. But that's sophisticated beyond my ability now and beyond my vision. But at one time, I really enjoyed doing it. But just enjoying doing it doesn't mean you're good at it. It just means I had a good time trying. So I cannot say that anything that I've ever done any II work with would have outcompeted naturally mated queens. I don't think that would have been the case.
Okay, we'll wrap it up. I would point out that on Honeybee Obscura, the podcast, there are numerous issues that Jim talks about queens, and they are indexed. So you can find some of those topics because they are all still, I guess most all or all of them are still available, that you can go back and take a look at them. And I do recommend that if you have the chance that you go back and look at some of those.
Well, thank you.
I want to thank you so much for discussing queens this evening. A lively discussion, excellent discussion, lots of good points, even to the dark period that you talk about.
That was me. I'm trying to explain to you what I feel like there.
Yeah. Okay. Novel way to illustrate that with your dark slides. Thank you.
Before
Jim.
you go, I want to tell the group I really enjoyed talking. It's already bedtime here, but I'll lie in bed and think of all the things I should have said and all the things I should have done differently. But thank you for inviting me and for putting up. I know you've had to go through a lot to coordinate with me. I've not been the easiest guy, and I apologize to you and to the group for that. This is where you say it's all right, Dewey. Don't leave that open air there.
Yes, no, it's that pregnant air time there. No, it's all right.
Okay,
and it was certainly well worth it. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate.
Thank you. All right, thank you.
All right. I'm going to need you to stop your screen sharing so we can bring our second speaker on.
Thought I had done that.
Okay. I guess you have actually. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Our second presentation then this evening is one of our directors for WAS. Each of our states have a director. Our director from California is a fellow that started bees and started with agriculture here in Oregon in the Willamette Valley. And then jobs took him hither, whither, and yon, many different locations. And then being back in the Sacramento area of California, he had a happenstance to go back into bees. So Daniel Schoenthal, our second of our presenters this evening, is going to talk a little bit about some of his journey, his personal journey with bees, and discovering that by when he went back into bees, the scenario had changed, the story had changed, and of course the change was Varroa. So we'll let Daniel. Are you ready? You're muted still at this point. To have you come on and do our second presentation this evening.
Hold on a second.
Okay, you're coming up there. It's just coming up. Good. You're there. Okay.
Yeah, hold on a second. There we go. Well, first of all, thank you for having me and all. I appreciate it. It's going to be a little bit of a shorter presentation and a little bit of a personal journey, as well as a discussion about the unique aspects of California here. So
Daniel, excuse me. Can you go to full screen on your slides? You're showing. Go up to slideshow and go to. We've got both your slides and then your screen showing.
Is that showing now?
Still the same.
Okay, hold on a second.
If you go at the top to slideshow and then begin.
Let me do it over. Yep. Is that
there
good?
We go. Yeah.
Okay. Oops. One more time.
That pencil got away from you.
Yeah. Hold on. Got to start the slideshow again. Okay, get the pencil off the screen. Anyway, so thank you again. I'm going to do a little bit faster so that we can get out of here for the evening. Let me hold on a second. So at the age of 14, in a time when there wasn't much TV or computer games to do, I basically had an encyclopedia and the farmland around me. That spring, when I was 14, I walked up to a man in a white suit and asked him, "What are you doing?" We had orchards and always had bees in them, so I was familiar with the hives. But this was the first time I got a chance to walk up to the guy. Of course, he handed me a suit and said, "Put it on." So that was my beginning into beekeeping. And of course, as a young man, that was quite fascinating. However, this led to a time that I call the bee wars. His method and goal was how fast can he get the job done before they killed you. We left thousands of bees every time we worked the hives looking for victims. It was both exciting and painful, but maybe not the best beginning to beekeeping. So I left that and went off to college into another career. I was focused on mainly other things. But in the 80s, I had the opportunity to go to Oregon State University to give a lecture on wild guanacos and maternal behavior in the wild. And I had noticed on the thing that there was a lecture in the morning on understanding brood diseases in hives. And I thought, why not attend that? I mean, that just seemed like something to do. It was a complete surprise to me. The lady that was giving the demo, I'll get something here. The lady that was giving the demo had the most gentle method of working bees I'd ever seen. I'm not sure she used the smoke, but everything she did was very controlled, careful, cautious, and gentle. I walked away from that meeting going, I had been doing it wrong. So I quickly talked to a couple friends, found some lands, and got bees. Bees were a lot easier in the 80s. In Oregon, we didn't have moths, hive beetles, and of course, no Varroa. It was really, as our previous doctor had pointed out, a question of managing queens and understanding the forage in the area. I quickly grew up to about 400 hives that we sent out for pollination and honey. And it was the first time that I enjoyed work and was making some money. Let me say that it was so much simpler then that when I got out of it, I felt very, very satisfied. But then I'm a little behind on my screens here. Then I moved to California. California was a completely different environment to me, both in terms of the cities, the people, and the jobs. I thought I was really going to enjoy it down here, and I did. I've been here ever since. But no bees. However, I ran into a friend, and he knew that I had had bees when I was younger, and he said something very surprising to me. He had lost over half of his hives that he needed to take to pollination, and he was desperately trying to find a solution. We talked about it for several hours, and I said, I have nothing to do to help you. And that was kind of the end of it, I thought. But 2 days later, a swarm showed up at our office, and I had no choice but to gather it, put it in a box, and I was back into beekeeping again. Luckily, I knew some people at UC Davis from previous work with camelids. And so I went over there and they took me over to the bee lab, and I spent about 2 hours talking to them. And I found out how serious the Varroa problem was. And it was a shock. I didn't watch much news, and stories about bees I always figured were exaggerated, but I could see the seriousness in their faces. So I decided, since I had, quote, retired at that point, that I would go back in and see what I could do to raise bees. And all I can say is my first 2 years were absolutely miserable. I lost colony after colony. I probably lost more colonies in those 2 years than I'd lost in my previous entire experience with beekeeping. I was trying everything that the experts recommended, and I was still chasing mites. They were here, there, and everywhere. Then I had the very, very lucky, I call it, I ran into a friend of this group, Randy Oliver. And his site, Scientific Beekeeping, had a mite calculator on it. That mite calculator answered all the questions that I had about mites. It took it from a chaos situation to I now could tell what was going on, whether I was going up or down in population, and it was amazing. And that, what he provided was the picture to the jigsaw puzzle, and now all I had to do was assemble it. So I took my background in observational biology, and I started putting cameras in hives and analyzing how they interacted with the miticides that we were using. Because basically what I found out was that in the field, they were very, very less efficient than they were in the lab. Many of them claimed 94, 95%, and I was seeing in the field 80%, and I needed to know why. So that brought me back into beekeeping. I wanted to back up for a moment so that you understand I had had a zoological background, and we had a completely different view of parasites than the beekeepers that I was dealing with in the late 20 teens. We wanted no parasites. So my goal switched from 2% to treat to I want no mites, never, zero, every month, no mites. And so we undertook quite a program, and I'm sure we can answer some questions about that later. But our goal was 0, and it took us 2 years to get to that point. So some other things that some of the other people might recognize in that process, we ran into the most interesting circumstance, and that is the urban areas of Sacramento Valley get thousands of swarms a year. And we had to come up with some ways to get those in the public areas. So we worked with UC Davis and some other people, and we developed some systems for calmly collecting bees in public areas. And it's something we're really, really proud of. So now let's talk a little bit about California. California is a really interesting place. It is also very, very full of bees. In fact, if there is any place in the world that has surplus bees, it would be the Sacramento Valley, which is a really, really rare thing in this entire world. We have about 65% of the hobby hives west of the Rockies, 30% of the sideliners, the small scale sideliners in the United States, and along with Montana, Texas, Florida, we're home of most of the large beekeepers of the US. Part of the reason for this is California's size. We have so many climates here. We often talk about how beekeeping is very much a local thing. You have everything that you do with beekeeping, it has to be attuned to the local environment. Well, California doesn't really have a single local environment. We have everything from high mountains and plains to the Mediterranean Valley to the deserts of the southeast. We are very, very different. So when we have club meetings here, we always have to talk not about California, but about where in California you are. Climate changes have been severe here in terms of the fluctuation. Last week, we had one day that was 86 degrees for a high, and the next day, the high was 44. That kind of swing is a major issue in the springtime here for us beekeepers. We end up with numerous problems because of those early spring swings. The other thing with California here is we have a tremendous, tremendous difference in precipitation. As you can see on the map, we have precipitation from 60 inches to 2 inches in the state. That has a really, really severe effect on the forage, along with the large agricultural valley, which is irrigated. We have tremendous number of different kinds of climates to deal with bees. And of course, in the South, we also have a lot of African hybridized issues. So what's the big deal about California? It's the almonds. Now, when I was doing pollination back many years ago, almonds were not pollinated. I think the earliest they were pollinated was about 1995. But if you think about it for a minute, 2.2 million of the 2.8 million hives in the lower 48 are transported to California for 2 months every spring. That is a huge, huge transportation issue. And something I like to mention to people, very few of those hives are inspected for anything. So California has a very, very interesting situation. The big thing about the almond crops is that people need to understand the numbers. $340 worth of bees per acre adds over $1,200 to the crop production. And I can't think of any single thing that you do in farming, livestock or agricultural crop, that changes the value of a crop so much as bees do for almonds. That is a huge, huge benefit. That leads to a real shortage in the spring for almonds here in California. On top of that, we now have a new problem in that the almond prices have dropped almost 40% in the last few years. That has put a real pressure on the almond producers to cut their costs. Bees are one of those costs they would like to cut. And trust me, that desire for low price bees causes a secondary problem in California, in that we have tens of thousands of hives stolen every year and merged into the pollination market. But on the other hand, there are some really great benefits in California with the bees. There's a huge public awareness. I moderate about a dozen different Facebook pages, and we have 200,000 or 300,000 members, and over 220,000 of those members are in California. So that gives you an idea of how big the hobby population here is. High number of hobbyists means a lot of new people, and that brings a lot of energy into the beekeeping here, something that works out really good. We have a huge impact in the school systems here. Most of the local schools have regular bee presentations. Many of the local clubs put on maybe 2 or 3 dozen school presentations each year. There's a lot of course, there's major conferences here. There's also UC Davis Bee Lab. So we have a huge amount of research and education going on in the state. There's at least 30 local and regional bee clubs in the state. Now, that means there's a lot of bees for sale and a lot of bees wanted. So we have a very, very active bee hive nuke package market here in California. Unfortunately, there's some really bad side effects to this too. We have, because of our climate, we have a large amount, and by large, I mean large amount of pests. Wax moths can often survive the winter here, so spring can be quite interesting with deadouts. Of course, small hive beetles, and by all means, Varroa. One of the problems with those 2.2 million hives coming in is that you could imagine that a few percent of those hives swarm every year. Well, if 5% of the almond hives swarm, that would be 110,000 swarms in the Sacramento Valley. We don't have 110,000 old oak trees. So we have, first of all, it's easy to trap bees here. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. You put a box out and you'll have bees by March, April at the latest. But those bees most likely are going to be sick because the huge number of swarms and feral populations means that we have a large number of untreated hives, mainly feral hives in the area. Frequently, our removal of feral hives, we find commonly 10–15% mite loads. We have a difficult regulatory situation here in California. Technically, virtually none of the miticides are legal here in California. but they're also not illegal. They just have, nobody has ever paid for the California approval process, which is quite expensive. So OA is not approved for use here in California. We also, because of those large number of swarms and the large number of hobbyists, we have a huge number of complaints in our urban areas. Therefore, we also have a lot of pressure for regulations. And this is a major function of most of the bee clubs in the area, is managing those complaints and those regulations. So getting back to what I call a mixed side effect of California. I myself relocate over 100 swarms a year. The 3 local clubs in my area do another couple hundred. We have a lot of swarms. And that again is right now, today, I went and to 4 different swarm calls. And after this conversation is done tonight, I'll be picking up 3 different hive boxes after dark. And that is a common day in April. So I'm going to actually go to take some questions here. I know we've got a little long here, but I thought that it would be better if I took questions. I want to stress people when I talk about mite control that they follow all the rules and regulations. But let's see if there's any questions and I can answer them.
Thank you, Daniel. And I did neglect to indicate that you do prefer like DW as your moniker. With blue-green horizons, then in getting the swarms, are you then are you hiving the swarms and finding new homes, new families that are taking these swarms, or are these for destruction?
No. So we're blue-green horizon is an animal rescue. And just like any animal rescue, when we rescue a hive, a swarm, a cutout, a trap out, they go to a quarantine apiary where we will treat them for 90 days for mites and other and possibly European foul brood or anything else that we have. Once that is done, sorry, I lost part of my internet here. Once that is done, many of our hives, we donate them to Girl Scout, 4-H, veterans programs like Heroes for Hives, and school programs.
Okay, you have more than one location then. With that number that you're handling, you must have more than one location which you're taking them to for the rehabilitation.
Yeah, we have 4. I have 4 apiaries that I put bees at that are probably 20 miles apart.
Your observation is that they have mites that all of these swarms basically will require some mite treatment before they're rehabilitated?
Well, I won't say all of them have mites, but we have a substantial, we test every swarm, or I should say we did test every swarm. I currently test any swarm that I am concerned about, but we treat for 90 days every swarm. We have a very specific program that we do. When I get a swarm, they are hived with a frame of honey, a frame of open brood, and we immediately start treating. And we will treat every 2 weeks, or depending on the miticide, for at least 60 to 90 days. And the purpose of that treatment is I want no viruses in my system. So to get no viruses in my system, I have to have no mites, and I have to have no mites for a long period of time. Now, if I get mites back, they're not spreading viruses at near the rate that they would have been before, and so I can go longer periods. The last 2 years, however, we've gone to a program of essentially treating constantly.
Okay. I have a complication on my schedule, so I'd ask Kurt if he could take over and monitor the questions that come in. And so, Kurt, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to have to bid all adieu this evening. I will say that next month, our May program has been set. We have a returning speaker, Garrett Slater, and it'll be a topic that is very temporal right now. And he's going to be coming back and talking about some new findings that he has with drones. And we'll then present our another of our committee members, Catherine Thompson from Colorado, who's also going to present that evening. So we'll post information on that. So I'll turn this back over to Kurt. Thank you, Kurt, for filling in for me for the rest of this evening.
No problem. Have a good night, Dewey.
Thank you.
Medhat, I see your hand up. I'm going to go to one question in the Q&A, and then I'll go to you.
Oh, yeah.
DW, Amy
Actually,
Green has a question.
My question and the Q&A. Like somebody asked.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Amy asked DW, she said, great presentation. She asked if you're aware of any areas within California that have low levels of Varroa, and does it vary within the state? And if so, what variables do you see at play?
Sure. Overwintering brood is the whatever we have an environment in the Sacramento Valley with care. I'm brooding moderately all winter long. So obviously that gives an opportunity, a high opportunity for mite growth at a period where you may not be managing your hives as well. So that's one of the biggest issues we have is people find out they treat in the fall, but by spring, they have a lot of mites. Okay. And so again, going back to my zoological background, that was not acceptable to me. So now areas down in the southern part of California, there's much less bees, much less mites, much less water, much less forage, much less brooding. So we can pretty much determine, and I think Randy has done quite a bit of work on this, is that really the local brooding rate tells you what your mite rate will be.
So most likely that's areas towards the south of the state, basically, where
or
they may
higher
have
elevation.
brood or higher elevation. Okay, great, thank you. We have another question that came in that says, how are you dealing with reinvasion?
So I'm assuming they're talking about drifting?
I believe so as well. I can get the participant to unmute if you want clarification. Give me 1 second.
So I'll talk a little bit about the overall aspect of, and I think Randy is also doing some great work in this area and other people are. There's a lot more drifting between hives than we even imagine. Do you still have me? Okay. Anyway, both workers and drones, I'm very convinced that we have far more drifting, particularly in apiaries where we're using single queen lines and stuff like that. So I accept that an apiary is a single unit. I am treating the entire apiary. And I liken our treatment program to much like if you found a stray dog and you had it in your house for 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden you're scratching and itching because you got fleas. So what you have to do at that point is you have to bomb the house, spray the backyard, bathe the dog, and put it on a monthly flea treatment. We do the same thing with bees. When I get bees, I get rid of the mites and then I keep them away. So if I'm doing that in an apiary, I'm getting very little drifting of mites because I don't have mites in my hives to drift. But the issue that I have, again, I don't want to argue with experts, but the concept of having 2% mites in my hives is just totally unacceptable to me. I'm leaving a huge viral evolutionary soup, and I know people are working on various queen lines and so on and so forth, but mites evolve faster than bees. They have a higher population genetic mix. There's more inbreeding in them. So I'm not sure we're ever going to breed bees if we're leaving mites around to also evolve with them. The same thing goes with viruses. It's very clear now that deformed wing virus is a new version. And that new version is because it no longer has to deal with the bee's immune system. It's being injected directly into the body. It's not going through the oral system. It's not triggering immune response from the bees. And so now the fastest virus wins. And we've ran into, as a human species, what happens if you don't have really effective viral control. You get evolution of those viruses. And so the concept of 2%, I'm treating until I get none, none, and none.
Great. Does that answer your question, Frank?
Yeah, not in a way. We have the same thing. We have brood all year in New Zealand in some areas, and we treat, and then after 10 weeks you take it out, and a couple of months later your hives are dead because they've gone out and robbed something dying, and it doesn't take very long for that to happen. So I was asking what sort of control he does for reinvasion.
So the main thing we're doing is once we do treat, and I use formic, thimonol, amitraz, etc. Once we're done with that program, I'm then using OA, extended release, in the hives constantly. I'm replacing it the method I use, I replace every time I inspect the hive. I take out the old, I put in new. So I'm keeping the population down by using extended release OA, but only after I've eliminated the mites in the first place. Because extended release OA is essentially flea drops. But
yeah,
for bees.
We find the same thing. If you keep it in the hive, it won't actually overtake the actual reinvasion overtakes it.
Of OA?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any now I'm putting the OA in there in the springtime every 2 weeks, the dribble, or a pad, or in my case, I use a different application method, but I'm basically keeping a very constant level of OA in that hive.
Okay, yeah, that's probably more. We only do it once a month or less
Now,
than that as well.
I'm finding that the pads or towels have a fall off rate of about 20 to 25 days, in which they are no longer effective after that point.
Thank you. Good information.
Thank you very much. You mentioned, excuse me, your metrics for mite levels. What are you using to test? Are you doing alcohol washes?
Hold on a second. Yes, I do alcohol washes. I tried soap washes for a while, but because of the method I use, which is I filter after I do the wash, and then I dry the filter, the coffee filter, and I count off of a coffee filter, because I want to get a solid number count. I want to have the most consistent methodology for mite count as possible. So I'm using alcohol because I find that still gives me the best thing. But I am treating basically, it depends on the year, the time of year, but I'm treating with, every fall I treat with thimonol, because I also have concerns about tracheal mites here in California. But when I get a swarm, I'm going to treat with formic and probably amitraz, and then I'm going to treat with formic again. So I'm going to treat for 3 solid different treatments for every swarm I get. I'm very
Okay.
comfortable with formic because I use it a lot, but formic can be an issue if you're not comfortable with it.
Great. That leads to the next question, which Anne asked, what miticides are you using? I think you've addressed that, but if you want to comment a little more on that.
Yeah, so all of the legal ones, and I rotate them. Again, I don't want to use a single one because I don't, although I doubt whether formic or oxalic can build up a resistance. But we do know that thimonol has a little bit of an issue, and of course amitraz and some of the other ones have, increasingly issues. But by rotating them, I'm preventing any possibility of the mites developing a resistance to a single thing. And we all know that, again, the methodology behind OA, they're not going to develop a resistance to the methodology behind a calcium ion oxidation. That's not possible.
Go ahead, Medad.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Daniel. So now, can you do, or do you do two different kind of treatments at the same time? Like, say, if you are applying, when you say amitraz, I assume you are using Epivar.
Yeah. So
And
no,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I'm not overlapping, but I'm doing it in series.
In series.
In series.
Okay.
I at one point in time I wanted to use OA at the same time,
Right.
and I was thinking, but I really didn't see any benefit, and I actually had several accidents. Apparently, you don't want the chemicals to mix, and
Right.
I had some OA drop down on some of those little plastic tabs, and it reacted.
Have you tried sublimation, OA sublimation?
So let me tell you a short story about sublimation. So I come from a laboratory background, and the
Right.
concept of vaporizing an organic acid and having an employee in the field doing that is just not acceptable to me. I have a full face mask and so on and so forth, and I've done it, and I feel fairly confident about my lab abilities, but I'm not letting an employee ever vaporize an organic acid.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, we spend a lot of time in the lab not vaporizing organic acids.
well, actually, like I'm here in Canada, and right now I do a lot of research in Saskatchewan. I think one of the, I would say, becoming a commonly used application of oxalic acid is sublimation, and we are using applicator, and we not encourage, must use all of the protective gear, and we haven't had any issues with that. We, at the beginning, when a few years ago, like almost 20 years ago, I was actually promoting using the dripping, but if you don't have the hives as singles, and if you do the dripping from on the top of the double brood chamber, you get only 50% efficacy. Unless you split the colonies and split the dose between top and bottom, you are going to have very low efficacy.
So I'm using the extended release, the glycerin.
Right.
I don't know if people understand that when OA has been used for mite control for many, many, many decades in other agricultural systems. And there's been two ways, sublimation and in sugar, because mites had either needed contact or they drank it or consumed it as a food. I think everybody was surprised when both kind of worked in bees, but it surely was a question that once Dr. Samuel's research came out and so on, we knew that they were not getting the OA internally. So I got away from the sugar. So what I have is all my brood frames are grooved on the top. Okay, think of it as a router groove. And I make an OA dribble solution. I put it in a caulking gun and I keep those grooves filled all the time.
Thank you.
Every time I open up the box, I make sure that those grooves are filled with OA glycerin.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Any other questions? So attendees, you can put your questions in the Q&A. Just a reminder for panelists, you don't have access to the Q&A. You can just unmute and ask questions. Any other questions for DW?
I have a question, David. You had said pads and sponges, which I know is a thing that may or may not be accepted right now. But also in Hawaii, we have been doing research on microplastics due to the beetle towels that have been used. Has there been any research on the microplastics with bees tearing up the ways you had mentioned earlier in actually bringing it into the hive and into the honey and wax? Because that is an issue that was brought up to Epimonnia this last year. It's an issue that we are dealing with, and I would assume the rest of the country, since it doesn't seem like that would be a Hawaii only issue, is getting those towels are creating microplastics in our honey and our waxes. And I can put the research paper on the chat.
Yeah, so I stopped using towels after 1 year. And then I went a different route other than the sponges. And the basic reason I have for that is that towels and sponges are designed to absorb a liquid. Okay, and when I took towels and sponges out, I found out that I was still only losing 15, maybe 20% of the OA. That the towels and sponges did their job, they absorbed it. So I use craft paper straws that are filled in the center with OA, with the liquid OA, and then that can be set across the top of the frames. Well, the craft paper isn't putting any microplastics, and there's two benefits to straws. One, straws are designed to transport a liquid, not hold it. So almost all the OA, as it warms up, runs out of the straw. And the second thing is, through my camera research, bees do not like big flat things to walk across. I saw that most of the towels, it was either headbutting from below or edges. Okay, straws are twigs, right? Bees love to walk on sticks. They feel very comfortable walking on straws. I have so much more contact with the straw than I do with the pad that they were easily 2 or 3 times more effective than a pad. And on top of that, almost all the OA in a let's say my straw weighs 11 grams, 1 gram of it is the straw. So there's 5 grams of OA and 5 grams of glycerin in there. If I take that straw out 3 weeks later, it weighs 2.6 grams. So I'm putting almost all of that OA into the hive. Where if I use a sponge, 25-gram sponge, and I take it out after 3 weeks, it weighs 21 grams. So
awesome. Thank you. And I can see how you could also use either bamboo or reeds if you have a hard time getting those straws. Thank you very much.
Yep, and I have quite a bit of camera footage when I was testing the objects, because my concern originally was, where are we losing this efficiency, in all these chemicals? Burr comb, tight things, too big of boxes. Probably, I think the biggest thing with both sublation and dribble was just too little OA. I'm seeing people, the sublimation with, let's call it double or triple the recommended levels, being very, very effective. So I think it's important that not only is our application or the chemical understood, but the application method needs to be compatible with the bees too.
I'm sorry, DW, I missed the detail. How do you seal the straws?
I don't.
You don't. Okay. The
No.
glycerin, you just keep them in with the glycerin
No, I
and
freeze them. I make a glycerin mix. It's slightly modified from the 50-50, but it's pretty close. Then when I basically put a bunch of straws in a tube, I pour the glycerin in, and then I freeze it. And so
Interesting.
now when I put the cold straw in, it warms up and it leaks out.
Great.
I have quite a bit on my Facebook page, I think, about the straws if people are interested.
So, Daniel, so I'm kind of trying to imagine what you are doing here. It's like almost a long-term slow drip of oxalic acid in the hive.
Correct. Long-term contact with
Right.
with a long-lasting OA doesn't break down quickly in glycerin.
No.
So it's basically a method of maintaining, just like you do on your dog or your cat. You put that drop on the back of their neck and you're good for a month. So I want that drop of OA extended always going on in that hive so that they're always cleaning it up. So they're always moving it around, and I want it to be easy for me.
So how much total of volume you are putting each time you apply your treatment? How many straws?
So I'm putting basically each straw is 5 grams of OA and 5 grams of glycerin, and I'm using basically 1 straw per 2 brood frames. So I'm putting 4 straws maybe in a deep, and I'm putting them, of course, perpendicular to the frames.
Right.
But again, the straws are they flatten nicely, they fit in there, and the bees walk on them.
Yeah, okay. It's quite clear, thank you.
Where when I saw cameras and saw the fact that nobody walks across the top of this towel.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's why sometimes there's discrepancy between the towels and the original paper, which recommends it's like the V-shape strip.
Yep.
That's why they use the 8 strips,
Yep.
1 strip for every 2 frames to
Right.
allow
So
the
the
bees.
So the other thing about straws, or let's say cardboard strips, I had far too much brood death underneath those strips.
Right. That's
But if
it
I
takes a
fold
lot
a
of
straw,
space. Yeah.
yeah, if I fold a straw in half and hang it over a frame, I'm not interrupting much brood.
Right.
Right. I mean, the bees can get around that straw, they're going to go under it, and so on and so forth. So the size becomes really important. And if you think about that, again, each straw is putting over 4.6 grams of OA into that hive over 2 weeks.
No propolis or wax built around the straws or seal the ends.
Well, I will tell you, I put some straws on top of a honey super. I've just put them in every super on that hive. They sealed up some of the straws with hive beetles inside.
Okay. That's
so
fine.
I'm seriously thinking maybe plastic straws might be really good hive beetle traps, because you could put some bait way down deep, right? And the bees couldn't get to it, and the hive beetles would go into the straw. But right now I find that healthy hives take care of hive beetles.
Okay, thank you.
So just to be clear, DW, you're using paper straws? Did
Craft
you say?
paper straws. Now they're treated with probably a food grade mineral oil so that they don't absorb. But again, that's not much of a problem. You know, bees obviously, and that may be why they don't propolis them. Because if you want to not have propolization, I mean, I do this all the time, and this is another one I have some Facebook posts on. Because I'm opening my hives all winter long, because I'm kind of doing research, you know, and I'm opening them. Well, it's not good to break that seal. So I use a beeswax caulking around my boxes so that when I close them back up, they're always sealed. And I found that a beeswax, which is about 80-20 mineral oil and beeswax, is such that they won't propolize it. Because the caulking, there's no air flow or anything for the bees to respond to, right? It's sealed. And propolis doesn't stick to mineral oil. So my boxes lift off and go back together easy. You don't even have to put a hive tool between them. And in fact, I know people around here kid me, but I think beeswax caulking is the least used, and it should be one of the major things that we use in beekeeping.
Could you provide us a link?
It really helps with robbing in the fall. If when you seal that box, it's sealed.
Could you provide us with a link to your Facebook page?
Sure.
That stuff.
Blue Green Horizons, and you can find YouTube and Facebook. And my website has links to both of those. So I'll put that in the chat.
That'd be great. Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah,
While you're doing that, I'm sorry, Carrie.
I was going to say, you do have one more question from Judith Prima. She
Yeah.
thought you heard mention putting OA gel into a groove at the top of each frame. How would you address this process? So it's another question on how you're doing that.
Okay, hold on a second here. Let me. Is she asking how I make the frame?
I think she's asking the process of how you mentioned that you put the gel in the top of the frame. It might be how you create the frame and what you do with it there.
The top bars, before I assemble the frame, I just run on a router table, and I'm routing out an 8-inch groove in the frame, just shallow enough. Now I'm coating that frame then with beeswax, that groove, because if I put OA in that frame, wood bleach is going to destroy that frame. But as we all know, OA is not will not affect beeswax. So I groove it. I dip that top frame in beeswax, and now I've got a groove that I can put that OA in using a syringe or a caulking gun. And again, I think I have videos and stuff on my Facebook page on that.
So DW, you said you put an 8-inch groove. Is that an 8/8 groove?
8-inch thick by just about a 1/4 inch deep. So think of a straw.
Right.
You know, I'm not using the straw with the groove, but I'm making the groove to be about the same size as a straw.
Okay. And Judith clarified the question. She wanted to know the specifics of the gel. Is it just a glycerin mixture?
Yeah, so and the best place to go, and I really recommend people have a full understanding, would be Randy Oliver's Scientific Beekeeping. He has all the formulas there and gives you a good understanding on how to make it and stuff. And I'm using a very, very similar formula. So one thing I want to go back to on the towels, because I think some people have missed this, and it was really easy to see with the cameras, is OA absorbs water from the air. And what I saw on towels was that the surface would get coated in high humidity situations, and in the fall, most hives are very high humidity. They would build up a water vapor that would cover the top of that towel or sponge. Now you're no longer accessing the OA. And so the biggest thing that I found was that the humidity really decreased the ability of bees to contact OA on the towels or the sponges.
One last question from Amy. And you kind of addressed this, but maybe you can address more directly. She asks, do the bees eventually chew the paper straws and send them out the front door? Do you clean them up after a period of time? What do you do?
So I'm going in every 2 weeks in the spring, both for swarm season here. And you can imagine how much brooding we have when your bees come out of winter with brood. I mean, we have a lot of brooding. So if I'm doing every 3 weeks, I'm replacing those straws every 3 weeks. I just pick them up and take them out. They will tear them apart, but I'm putting in new straws before they tear them apart.
Great.
And they're very easy. You just pick up a straw and you throw it away.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Actually, I put them in my compost pile because I have a feeling they're probably good for the compost pile.
Okay, we're at time. I want to thank all the speakers, panelists, and attendees. Thank you for attending, and thank you for presenting. As Dewey said, expect an email soon with details for the May mini conference. Thank you all and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great meeting. Thanks, Kurt.